Hello and welcome to Arise America. I'm Debbie Turner-Bell. In the news today, 200 bodies, victims of the downed Malaysian Airlines flight, are due to arrive in the Netherlands in the next few hours. Meanwhile, in eastern Ukraine, the search continues for the remaining 98. Also, the FAA prohibits all U.S. flights to Israel for 24 hours after Hamas rocket lands just a mile from Tel Aviv's Ben Gurion Airport. And in New York, more suspensions after a man dies in what many call an incident of police brutality. The NYPD vows to retrain every officer on use of force. We will have that and a lot more right now on Arise America.
From coast to coast, every culture, every angle. This is Arise America.
The remains of victims from Malaysia Flight 17 are now closer to home and receiving the proper funerals they deserve. The bodies departed by train from the eastern Ukrainian city of Torez and delivered to Ukrainian authorities on Tuesday. Meanwhile, in Washington, U.S. President Barack Obama paid his respects to the victims. He signed a book of condolences at the Dutch embassy today on behalf of the American people. He also pledged U.S. assistance in the ongoing probe. International anger remains high over the mistreatment of the victims whose corpses lay in open fields for days. Many are now calling for justice. There's growing suspicion that the missile which brought down the passenger plane was shot from rebel-held territory with assistance from Russia. For the latest on today's events, we turn to Arise News correspondent Philip Warwick, who brings us a report from Donetsk, Ukraine. He joins us on the phone. Philip, what do you know today?
Well, as you have said, the train has arrived this morning in Kharkiv and the bodies were put into storage facilities. What I understand is that Dutch officials in Kharkov have said only 2 bodies were on the train and not 282. How can we explain this? The Dutch expert have suggested to put the lighter bags, so not bags with the full bodies, and the lighter bags into the full body bag because they tend to break easier. So basically we have smaller bags in the large body bags. So that has taken place. So at the moment it has been difficult or impossible to come to a definite count. If it's really 200, 282 or something in the middle.
In the meantime, has there been any measures to secure the crash sites? There are multiple ones we know. And what's been happening on these sites?
Well, as I've mentioned yesterday, the Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko has instructed the army not to fire within a 25-mile diameter of the site. The Malaysian officials did say that they felt secure when they conducted the research. Today, however, they could hear rocket bombardment in the background. I'm also able to hear the same bombardment after they had left, and this continued for quite some time in the afternoon. This came from the Grad multiple rocket launch system, which has been used by either the separatists and the Ukrainian army.
I've been reading reports on this side in the U.S. here, Philip, that some of the officials that have traveled to help with the investigation, specifically the OSCE, has been making observations about how the evidence has been tampered with, that some pieces of the plane are in different positions. Can you bring any light, shed any clarity there?
Well, what they've observed when you had the recovery take place yesterday to some extent is that there was a crane which came in and lifted the components of, actually all of the main components of the plane. So we're talking about the tail fin, the rear cone, the undercarriage, the main part of the fuselage. And from what I understand, when I spoke to the security services, they said that they're actually looking for further bodies. But in the process, they have not just simply tampered with the evidence, but also by lifting and then replacing, they weren't actually putting it back in the same place. So we are not getting the same picture. We won't have the same picture of the crash site now as it was, say, last couple of days.
And can you explain perhaps why they're having difficulty recovering all the remains of the victims of the plane crash? Is it that perhaps there are sites that have not yet been thoroughly inspected, or that these remains were completely obliterated in the crash and the resulting fire?
Well, your second point, that actually did take place. This is actually an observation made by the three Malaysian officials that the main crash site is composed of two.
I'm sorry, say that last part again, Philip. I missed it. Oh, sounds like we have lost Philip Borick, but he's been reporting for us from Donetsk, and we thank him very much for that report. The downed Malaysian Airlines flight continues to inspire outrage from leaders across Europe. On Thursday, the Dutch Prime Minister demanded that, quote, forceful action be taken against Russia for its role in Ukraine. From London, UK Prime Minister David Cameron urged the EU foreign ministers gathering in Brussels to focus on the Russian arms sector. The UK and the United States have criticized a French sale of 2 ships to Russia worth more than $1 billion. French President Francois Hollande said the first ship is nearly complete and, quote, must be delivered in October. The European Union's Catherine Ashton explained the EU's planned expansion of sanctions.
We today decided to accelerate the preparation of targeted measures agreed at the summit last week, in particular to put in place very quickly a list of entities and people, including from Russia, under the new enhanced criteria, and to expand the restrictive measures to target individuals or companies who actively benefit from support of the Russian decision makers responsible for the annexation of Crimea or the destabilization of eastern Ukraine.
Bill Courtney is the former U.S. ambassador to Kazakhstan and Georgia. I spoke to him earlier from Washington, D.C. Bill, the European Union has announced these more stringent sanctions if Russia does not do something to help de-escalate the tension as well as facilitate the investigation into the shooting down of Malaysian Air Flight number 17. So my question is, does these new round of sanctions, even if they're put into place, go far enough?
These sanctions that were agreed today by the European Union really only deal with individuals, and later this week the European Union is supposed to make known additional numbers of individuals, I would imagine in the dozens, of folks who should be sanctioned. But once again, there's a promise to move on to sectoral sanctions that could affect broad sectors like the financial, energy, or industrial, defense industrial area, but no decision has been taken on those.
Yes, I understand it. They've asked an executive committee or something similar to that to prepare those types of sanctions. But here's the question. Does the EU have the stomach to impose sanctions like that?
Well, the European countries should be rallying around the Dutch now, because this is a terrible tragedy to have killed so many citizens of the Netherlands, as well as citizens of other countries. But there are diverging interests. Italy, for example, has a lot of business interests in Russia and has traditionally been closer to Russia. Germany receives 30% of its natural gas from Russia. So coming to grips with those varying issues is a lot harder than making sanctions here. Over there, all the European Union governments have to agree by consensus. We don't have that here. The president can decide most of those things.
Yeah, and we've even seen the disagreement even in France's decision to go ahead with the delivery of a warship to Moscow. This certainly hurts the EU's position in terms of putting pressure on Putin, doesn't it?
Yes. The French are almost complete in construction of an amphibious assault ship for Russia that Russia ordered after the August 2008 invasion of Georgia, when it determined that its amphibious ship capabilities were too weak and that they couldn't build that capability themselves. So they ordered 2 from France. One is almost complete. There are 400 Russian sailors now in France training on that ship. So Francois Hollande, the French president, wants to go ahead and send that to Russia. But today, for the first time, he allowed that perhaps a second ship, which the Russians had not yet paid for, might be postponed.
So let me just ask you about Putin's resolve. He's been very defiant during this entire crisis, of course, washing his hands, stepping back, saying that he has almost nothing to do with what the pro-Russian separatists are doing. However, is this downplaying a sea change enough to force him to soften his stance?
It could be. It's still a little unclear how they're going to play it. The Russians and the Kremlin in particular are concerned about how much Western intelligence knows about what happened. Does Western intelligence figure out that it was just the separatists who shot it down, or might Western intelligence organizations have learned that actual Russian troops under the Russian command and control system shot the plane down? That's still a little bit unclear. The Ukrainian government is saying they have evidence now from communications intercepts that it was actually Russian troops. And the Ukrainians thus far have been fairly reliable in the things they've said publicly, but there needs to be more evidence to sort that out. I think Putin is waiting to see how much the West knows about what actually happened, and Putin is waiting to see how strong the additional sanctions are going to be before deciding what to do. In the meantime, the press that are controlled by the government in Russia have been putting forth various conspiracy theories, including the idea, which is laughable, that all the passengers on the Malaysian Airlines were dead before they even took off from Amsterdam.
Yeah, those old tricks of diversion. I'm sure it's not lost on you or other experts like you that Putin has been strangely silent during this, with the exception of accusing the Ukrainian government being behind the shooting down of MH17.
Yes. Now, he has not claimed that the Ukrainian government actually fired the missile, but they have claimed that the Ukrainian government had this Buk anti-missile system in the area. But in fact, Western intelligence sources have said publicly that such a Ukrainian system was not there. So the Kremlin hasn't really pushed that line too hard. I think they're just waiting to see how much they're going to have to admit to. How much are they going to have to do to come clean, if you will, to lessen the international pressure, which has mounted very quickly over the last couple of days on the Kremlin.
All right, Bill Courtney, helping us understand it all from Washington. Thanks, Bill. It's good to talk to you.
Thank you, Debbie.
And we have some breaking news we want to tell you about. Senior U.S. intelligence officials said they have found no direct link between Russia and the downing of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17. However, they continue to believe that pro-Russian separatists fired the missile that brought down the passenger jet. Well, for more on what's happening in the Netherlands regarding the downed flight, let's go to Arise News correspondent Natalia Ojeska, who joins us from Amsterdam on the phone. Natalia, of course, we heard reports that the remains had left Ukraine on their way to the Netherlands. Can you tell us exactly where they are at this hour?
Yes, hello. Right now, there is no confirmed information whether the plane has indeed left Ukraine. There is an information that provided by Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte that the military aircraft Hercules, which is a Dutch airplane, is expecting to land tomorrow in the Netherlands, in the city of Eindhoven, which is 75 miles away from Amsterdam.
And talk us through the process, Natalia, of beginning to identify these remains.
Well, when this aircraft will land in Eindhoven, the remains will be transported to military barracks in Hilversum, which is 65 miles away from Eindhoven. And in this context, the city of Hilversum has a quite special meaning because this is the same town which was a home to three whole families who died in this plane crash. And once in Hilversum, there will work a separate organization, Netherlands Forensic Institute, that will try to identify the victims. There were already Dutch experts from National Forensic Investigation Team who have already tried to gather different DNA samples from families of the victims, like fingerprints, like hairs, information about any possible tattoos or molds. And later on, the experts in Hilversum are supposed to use a software called Bonaparte, which matches different DNA samples to those collected from family members. And based on that, they will try step by step identify those victims and provide the information to their relatives.
Because of the compromised state of these remains, as well as the sheer volume, nearly 200 so far, how long could we expect this process to take?
Well, the Dutch Prime Minister is providing actually the information step by step. He has right now said that it could be a couple of weeks. It can be also a couple of months. But I have found an information that the same team, which will be right now working on the identification of those victims, has already gained experience in identification of, for example, 2004 tsunami victims, and also in victims from crash in Tripoli, Libya. At that time, they were around 104 people, and they needed 30 days to identify them. So it could be really 2 months, 3 months. It really depends in which conditions will be the bodies.
We do know that the pro-Russian separatists turned over the black box to Malaysian authorities, but can you give us any update about the black boxes, and has anything been learned from them yet?
Well, right now we have the information that today in the city of Donetsk, the pro-Russian separatists have indeed handed over the black boxes to Malaysian experts who arrived exactly for that purpose to Ukraine. And those experts also said that the boxes were in good condition, and this is at the moment the only one information we have about them. And additional information has been today provided by the British Prime Minister David Cameron, that the British experts will retrieve data from those black boxes for the further international analysis, and probably the results will be submitted to the Dutch experts working in the Netherlands.
Natalia Ojeska reporting for us from Amsterdam. Natalia, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And still to come on Arise America, the renowned AIDS researcher who died on the passenger flight downed in eastern Ukraine. And the FAA bans all U.S. flights into Israel's largest airport in Tel Aviv for the next 24 hours. And the investigation continues into the death of a New York man who died after being restrained in an illegal chokehold.
I don't think the television news in the United States reflects the diversity of the world. I don't think it does a great job of even reflecting the diversity of the United States.
When you are watching TV, you don't really see a lot of different cultures. There are plenty of other places that people might not even know about.
We are living in a global culture, and you cannot hide news that is happening when there's so much social media.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
In U.S. news, Johns Hopkins Health System agreed to a $190 million settlement to 8,000 patients of a former gynecologist. Dr. Nikita Levy worked at East Baltimore Medical Center for 25 years, where he secretly recorded and photographed his patients' pelvic exams. Authorities discovered 1,200 videos and hundreds of images at his home. Levy committed suicide days after he was fired in February of 2013. And the Montana Supreme Court censured Judge G. Todd Baugh. The judge had sentenced this 47-year-old teacher to just 30 days in prison for raping his 14-year-old student. He also suggested that the victim shared some responsibility, even though the state's age of consent is 16. The teenager committed suicide while her case was pending. Arizona asked the U.S. Supreme Court to review a lower court's decision which halted the execution of Joseph Rudolph Wood. The death row inmate argues that he has a constitutional right to know more about the lethal drugs that would be used in his execution. A jury convicted Wood in 1989 of killing his ex-girlfriend and her father. And officials in Washington state believe they've recovered the last body from the March 22nd mudslide. Workers discovered the body of the victim while screening debris at the site. The tragedy claimed the lives of 43 people. Two federal courts handed down important rulings today on a central part of the Affordable Care Act. Rise News Washington correspondent Colin Campbell joins us from our nation's capital with more on this. Colin, hey, it's good to see you. You know, before we get to how confusing that these two rulings are, can you just give us the gist of these two cases that the courts heard?
Well, to put it bluntly, one court set back a huge blow for the Affordable Care Act. The other one still supports it. Now, what this means is the first court that handed down a judgment earlier today, a 2-1 ruling, saying that 36 states that offer subsidies to consumers are doing so illegally. And it all centers on a 4-letter phrase saying established by the state. What this means is these states that consumers who are getting health care subsidies should only be getting them through state-sponsored exchanges, according to the first ruling. But in the second one, in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in Virginia, they upheld the law, saying that the IRS did interpret the law properly in offering those tax subsidies, Debbie. But before we go to the next point, let's hear from Senator John Barrasso of Wyoming as to why he believes that the D.C. Circuit Court ruled favorably against the Affordable Care Act stipulation.
People wanted affordable, quality care from a health care law. But when you first have to pass a law before you get to find out what's in it, and you have a law that is terribly written and awful in its implementation, what you see is more confusion for Americans who are trying desperately to find affordable care. It is time to repeal and replace this health care law with real reforms. And I call on the Supreme Court to take up this case.
Now, if this is repealed, it would affect about 7.3 million people, or even more than that. This could actually take away about $36 billion in subsidies for low and middle income consumers who are looking for this extra help in trying to get health care, Debbie.
Now, Colin, it looked like this was going to be a bad day for the White House. How did the White House respond to the second decision?
Well, so far it's been kind of nonchalant. They said that the subsidies will continue. They said that this is not over, obviously, especially since the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals out of Virginia did uphold the law. Josh Earnest, the spokesperson for the White House, says that if this could go to the Supreme Court, he feels that they would rule favorably for the Affordable Care Act and that stipulation. Let's take a listen to Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid on why he believes that the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled the right way.
We heard early today that the D.C. Circuit issued an opinion that was adverse by a 2-to-1 margin of some of the things that's in Obamacare. But if you needed further proof that that's an outlier, all you need is wait a couple of hours for the Fourth Circuit, which they decided the direct opposite. 2 activist Republican judges sought to undermine a law that was passed in Congress, by Congress, upheld by the Supreme Court, is now benefiting millions of Americans. It seems clear to me that that decision will be overturned. In a matter of a couple hours, the Fourth Circuit disagreed.
The White House says that consumers will still get the financial assistance they need to subsidize their premiums. Now, what happens next is this will go to what's called en banc, which is a full body of judges, an 11-member panel who will make another ruling based on the D.C. Court's ruling.
Okay, I hope the viewers are keeping up with all this, but let me just ask you this. Since the vote in the first case was in Washington, it was split 2-to-1 with 2 Republican-appointed judges against a Democratic-appointed judge. Can we draw a conclusion here that there's some politics in play?
Yeah, we could say that. I can't say definitively. We like to think that judges rule objectively, looking at all the information and making their best decisions based on the facts that are presented to them. But of course, the judges are just like everybody else. They're normal human beings who wake up every day reading the paper. They have their own decisions. They're on their own minds made up on certain issues. So we could say that there could be some politics in play here. Of course, if this does go to the Supreme Court, whoever loses ultimately in these rulings after it goes to the en banc session, this may be brought up in front of the Supreme Court to make an ultimate ruling. So far, though, the Obama administration hasn't been doing that well when it comes to Supreme Court decisions. It's won a few, but it's also lost a few more. So a lot of people are anticipating at least the Supreme Court deciding whether or not they're going to listen to this case.
That means that we'll probably be talking about this again. Colin Campbell reporting for us from Washington. Thanks, Colin. See you tomorrow.
Okay, you're welcome, Debbie. See you.
And in business news, ongoing hostilities in the Middle East is impacting air travel. Arise News U.S. business editor Andrew Schmertz has that story and the rest of today's business headlines.
Thanks, Debbie. Earnings news continued to power the markets. Let's take a look at the final numbers. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 61 points. S&P 500, that's trading in record territory at 1983. The NASDAQ also up. If you're thinking you're paying more for some basic essentials, you're right. Consumer prices rose slightly in June. According to a government report, gas cost more last month than any time in the last year. Electricity and food prices also increasing. It is a big day, for corporate profits. Apple reporting after the bell that earnings beat expectations, but revenue coming in a little bit lighter than expected. Harley-Davidson is revving up its quarter earnings jump 30%. And Coca-Cola says its bottom line was hurt because Americans are drinking less Diet Coke. McDonald's also saw a dip in profits. Analysts say it's a result of competition and consumers changing eating habits. Yesterday, it was McDonald's and KFC. Today, Burger King and Papa John's on a growing list of chains caught up in a Chinese food scare. The Chinese government has shut down Shanghai-based Husi Foods after it reportedly sold expired meat. A Chinese broadcaster showed workers using bare hands to touch expired meat and food on the floor. Nationwide fruit recall coming out of California, while Wona Packaging says there are concerns of possible listeria contamination in its peaches, plums, nectarines, and pluots. It's a precautionary recall. The company says no illnesses have been reported. The recall affects fruit packaged from June 1 to July 12th and sold at retailers including Costco and Trader Joe's. Debbie?
Thank you so much, Andrew. Many in the fight against HIV/AIDS are mourning the loss of 6 AIDS experts who died in the downing of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17. They were traveling to the International AIDS Conference in Melbourne, Australia. The executive scientific director of the Amsterdam Institute for Global Health and Development, Joop Lang, is one of the victims. He was a doctor, visionary, and campaigner who spearheaded the push to get inexpensive antiretroviral drugs to the poor. The World Health Organization confirmed that communications officer Glenn Thomas was also on board. Their tragic deaths are a major blow to the global community of AIDS scientists and activists. Brenda Starks-Ross is the Deputy Executive Director and COO of the AIDS Service Center right here in New York City, and she joins us in our New York studio. Brenda, welcome to Arise America, and thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having
We've
me.
heard these reports about these AIDS scientists and researchers on their way to this conference. At first, there were these big reports that it was 100 or so. We know that there have been 6 that are confirmed. But I want to concentrate on Joop right now. Can you tell me a little bit about him as a researcher and his impact on AIDS research in the scientific community?
Yes. Well, it's a tragic loss. His death is a tragic loss. He is a proponent of triple combination therapy, which many of us in the AIDS community know that it saved thousands of lives. I was around in about 30 years ago when people were taking one medication and they weren't living. So that's why now it's a chronic illness, so.
Yeah, and all the reports are that this is just a really big blow to the AIDS scientific community. And it's important to note for our viewers, this triple compound, it's been so effective, particularly recently. Remember, there was a little baby in Mississippi that got, I believe, probably this triple compound and was cleared of AIDS for a few years of her life, although that the AIDS has returned. Can you tell me a little bit about this conference and what this conference was about and why they were going?
Well, the conference is an international AIDS conference, and basically people from all over the country come to the International AIDS Conference to learn about best practices, to meet and to network, to find out what they can take back to their communities to improve the quality of life for people who are living in HIV and AIDS in their communities.
Yeah, this is such an important fight. It's been going on for so many years. We seem to be making some progress, as you would say, but the loss of these researchers, and particularly Joop, what kind of impact does that have?
I mean, just think about Joop, that he did push to get HIV/AIDS medications in Africa. Like, he pushed it to make sure the medication was accessible. And one of his quotes was that if you can get Coca-Cola in every region of Africa, why can't we get medication there? And so this medication, like I was saying, it's, you know, people are living, people are dying with this medication. You know, people still have other illnesses like hepatitis C, but people are making long-term goals for their lives, you know, going to college and raising families and just doing the things that every other person does. It's no longer a death sentence, although there's stigma. So research, these researchers dying it's big, because without research, we wouldn't be here. So research is that driving force that allows folks to just exist. For example, in my family, I have a person who died from the virus, and this was in the early 90s, before the medication was available, and now it is available. You know, one-a-day medications. People are actually planning their lives out. So, you know, it is sad that the researchers are gone, but it must continue. And so, the one thing that we could do is to encourage young minds and researchers just to keep going, so that we could eventually, you know, follow the governor's. He has this new theory of the three-prong approach to getting rid of HIV and AIDS, and it's about finding people who are positive, making sure that they get the medications, and if they're positive, and to stay in care so that they would not infect other folks.
Yeah, and we can only hope that the legacy that was begun by Joop and all of these researchers will continue.
Exactly.
All right, Brenda Starks-Ross, thank you so much for coming in. We do appreciate it.
Thank
and you
you.
did great. You're watching Arise America.
If I was building my own news network, I think I'd want broad, in-depth knowledge of important issues throughout the world.
I would want to recruit a fairly diverse staff that had different life experiences before they came to news.
We want to see how we can help ourselves and help benefit other people, and not just see what's up with the celebrities and where they're going and traveling and buying this and buying that.
If I were to build my own news network, it would certainly have to reflect a diversity of culture, because that's the global situation, that's the global reality.
I would probably bring a lot of personal stories, really personal stories from the leaders of all countries.
If I was to build my own news network, I would just have people from all over who are very connected and diverse.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Well, Arise is the only network that really covers comprehensively the African diaspora. It gives people in other parts of the world of color a chance to know about people here in the United States, us to know about them, and the world to know about us. So it's kind of an educational experience for everybody involved. Getting to know people through stories, through personal stories. You really get a chance to know what people are actually all about, what communities are about. How are we different? But more importantly, what commonalities we all share.
The conflict between Israel and Gaza militants grows more dangerous without a clear end in sight. The death toll now exceeds 600 as Israel continues to pound targets across the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, a rocket fired from Gaza landed near Israel's main airport on Tuesday. It triggered an immediate response from the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration. The agency instructed American air carriers not to fly to Israel as it continues to monitor the situation. I spoke earlier with Arise News correspondent Carl Bostic, who is in Gaza City. Carl, just tell us what you've learned today.
Well, actually, the big news here is the ban by the FAA in the States for all American airlines, prohibiting them to fly in or out of Israel's international airport, Ben Gurion Airport. That's had a domino effect on European carriers who have also suspended flights until further notice. So that is major ones. And this is all after a rocket or missile was fired at Tel Aviv and landed in a suburb just adjacent to Ben Gurion Airport. And that's, as a result, has triggered mass cancellation of flights. Lufthansa has 10 daily flights. Those have gone away. Air France, 3 flights daily. Those have been suspended. And, of course, Delta Airlines was en route to Israel, but had to instead be diverted and land in Paris. And a U.S. Airways flight that was meant to take off has instead been grounded. This is a blow to the Israel government. For the transport ministry, in fact, asked the airlines to reverse their decision, but that was not the case. And only a week ago, Hamas had warned commercial airliners to avoid flying into the airport because they would continue targeting Ben Gurion's airport, and that's exactly what they did.
And you're there in Gaza City and the Gaza Strip. Is there any semblance of any kind of normal life going on there? You just arrived this afternoon. What have you seen?
Keep in mind that now this is the beginning of the 3rd week of the operation, which may have morphed into a campaign, which some are saying is the beginnings of a war. This is the 5th day of the ground offensive. 1 week ago when I was here, the number of those displaced was only 22,000 people taking shelter in UN schools. Well, now that 22,000 people figure has quintupled to more than 100,000 people who are taking shelter in UN schools. And there are so many displaced people that there are tens of thousands additional people who've had to take shelter in just whatever arrangements they can find, either with extended families or other locations. So you have a severe problem of internal displacement with very, very dire conditions.
Has there been any word, Carl?
I'd also add, there's still been no let-up in the fighting because, again, as many as almost 50 people have been killed by airstrikes or shelling. Now the death toll is up to 600. Israel confirmed that a 28th soldier has been killed, and now there's a missing soldier. And that missing soldier could actually even further complicate any talk of a ceasefire.
And very quickly, that's exactly what I was going to ask you about. Any word on the whereabouts or the condition of this missing soldier, Sergeant Oren Shaw? Is he even alive?
Well, that's the problem. This all came out of an incident on Sunday when 7 soldiers, they were in an APC, apparently had a mechanical breakdown, and at that point they were ambushed. An anti-tank missile was fired at the APC, and there was an exchange of gunfire. 6 were confirmed killed in that incident, but the 7th was not found. And Hamas later issued a videotape statement where they claimed they, quote, had captured an Israeli soldier, but they left it at that because that could mean they actually were holding a hostage, or they simply captured the remains, or they simply found his ID card or ID number. But as a rule, historically, Israel will move heaven and earth when it comes to not only finding a kidnapped soldier in terms of releasing and exchanging it for a lopsided number of prisoners, even just for the remains. They will really stop at nothing to recover it. So in other words, if there's a ceasefire now that's being discussed, or some sort of a truce, there's no way that Israel's going to pull back its troops until it's resolved the fate of that soldier, whether he's alive or his remains, to recover those.
Carl Bostic reporting for us from Gaza City. You stay safe, my friend. Thank you. Time now to take a look at the other news capturing headlines around the globe in our Arise News World Wrap. South Korean authorities said they found the suspected owner of the ferry that sank in April. His body was found decomposing in an open field last month. DNA testing confirmed his identity. Authorities had offered a $500,000 reward for tips leading to his whereabouts. Officials have retrieved 294 bodies from the disaster. 10 people remain missing. Also in the news, Indonesian election officials declared Jakarta's Governor Joko Widodo the next president. He won 53% of the vote. His opponent, a former general under a previous dictatorship, rejected the election results. The president-elect promises a decisive break with Indonesia's authoritarian past. And a suicide bomber in Afghanistan killed at least 4 people near the Kabul International Airport. 3 of the victims were foreign advisors, and the 4th was an Afghan interpreter. The Taliban claimed responsibility for the attack. And that is the Arise News World Wrap.
If I was to build my own news network, I would love a correspondent in every country, every location, every city.
Shahana Bhatt, Arise News, New Delhi.
Karim Gamaluddin, Arise News, Cairo.
Dale McEwen, Arise News, Karagosk.
James Blue, Arise News, Addis Ababa.
Ronnie Curvello, Arise News, São Paulo, Brazil.
We give them different angles on stories so they can get a different perspective of the people that they are looking at.
It's hard to pin down the exact number of Syrian refugees who have streamed across the border into Lebanon.
They stormed a media room in one of the hotels in Kuala Lumpur, holding placards reading, "Tell us the truth and return our families back to us."
Anchors and reporters that have covered wars, have covered disasters, have covered government shutdowns. There's nothing almost that this team hasn't experienced.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
I think media and reporters have a lot to answer for.
AIDS, hunger, people not having running water, the things that we just take for granted.
I think the most important issues in the world today are education and poverty.
Terrorism and war, I guess, is always. It's always an issue, and the quality of life of certain groups of people in certain areas.
I think inequality.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
The New York City Police Department is probing the death of an African-American man who a police officer appears to put in a chokehold. The incident has ignited outrage. We have this report.
A desperate plea from a man who was brought down to the ground. It shows the 43-year-old Eric Garner, who appears to be unconscious, lying handcuffed on the ground. Officers check his pulse and empty his pockets, but give no medical assistance before paramedics arrive 4 minutes into the video.
Sir, DMS, come on, we're here to help.
Garner was taken to a hospital where he was later pronounced dead on arrival.
Why nobody do the CPR?
No, I did nothing.
Because he's breathing. He's breathing?
The incident happened when Garner was confronted by police officers responding to a call that he was selling cigarettes illegally.
Every time you see me, you want to harass me, you want to stop me, trying to sell cigarettes. I'm minding my business, officer.
As they attempted to take Garner into custody, Officer Daniel Pantaleo is seen wrapping his arm around the 6'3", 350-pound man's neck. This despite the NYPD's ban on chokeholds.
The men and women of the NYPD are handed an enormous responsibility, the responsibility of keeping us safe, but also the responsibility of making very difficult split-second decisions in trying circumstances.
Officer Pantaleo, seen here waving to the camera, has a history of civil rights violations, having been sued twice in a federal court. He has now been stripped of his gun and badge. A second officer has now also been placed on desk duty.
This would appear to have been a chokehold, but the investigation, both by the district attorney's office as well as by our internal affairs, will seek to make that final determination.
Garner, a father of 6, suffered from asthma. Police said he went into cardiac arrest, but the medical examiner has not yet determined the exact cause of death. Meanwhile, his grief-stricken family understandably wants justice and a full-blown investigation.
He didn't die because he stopped breathing on his own. Somebody took his breath away from him. How senseless is that? They shouldn't have did this to my son. My son never hurted a soul, never.
New York Mayor de Blasio, accompanied by Police Commissioner Bill Bratton, has promised a full investigation. Eric Garner's funeral is due to be held tomorrow. Akhtar Khan, Arise America.
And Akhtar Khan joins us here in our Rise News studio. It is so difficult, Akhtar, to watch this video and to see this transpire. It seems like what's at the center of this controversy, besides a man dying over the use of force by law enforcement, is whether or not he was placed in a chokehold. Is there an official definition of what a chokehold is?
Well, according to the police and according to the definitions of the chokehold, it's to restrict the trachea. So in that instance, as we've seen in the video, quite clearly Eric Garner is being constricted and held to the ground, and for quite a few seconds the elbow is making connection, if you like, with the neck and restricting his breathing. And that's why he says he can't breathe. But then he says that after the chokehold, if you like, but that restricts his breathing, his ability to breathe. So restricting the trachea is effectively the definition of a chokehold.
And it's important to note that the chokehold is against the policy of law enforcement to use this in restraint. So let's talk a little bit about what is reasonable force. What's the general policy?
The US Supreme Court back in 1989 set out a case, Graham versus Collin, that effectively outlined what is reasonable force and uses the objective rather than subjective principle. So it looks at the Fourth Amendment and says, according to the Fourth Amendment, which protects the citizens against government agencies like the police, what is considered objectionable force? So in other words, if the officer feels that a crime is committed or being committed, if the person is resisting arrest, if the crime justifies such force, then that is considered to be reasonable force. In this case, if he was resisting arrest, was the force being used by the officer excessive to what a reasonable person would consider? So it's quite clearly outlined already.
You know, we were talking about this before the show, and you were telling me a little bit. I want you to share with our viewers how many times the chokehold has been reported to be used by the New York City Police Department, and how many times there was a ruling against them.
There's been an incident, if you like, back in '94, where a chokehold was very much the case, and you had a complaint against an officer, and that was the only time that disciplinary action was taken against the officer. But between 2009 and 2013, 1,022 cases, in Bronx and the Brooklyn mostly, but never in the city itself, were reported against the police in terms of a chokehold. So, but not one single officer has been disciplined as a result. But in this case, obviously now the officer in question has had his badge and gun removed, hasn't had restricted duty, as well as another accompanying officer.
And I was going to ask about, because there was more than one officer on the scene, so this the one that was doing the maneuver, Daniel. It has yet to be determined whether or not it's actually a chokehold. He's the one whose gun and badge has been removed. But there were at least 2 other officers on the scene, correct?
Several other officers on the scene, but Daniel Palento, who in fact has, as I said, a history of other cases, and in fact the 2 other incidences, the commission or the authorities had actually settled out of court of $30,000 with the 2 plaintiffs who made complaints against him. And so he has, if you like, a track record. Now, we won't know the outcome of, obviously the autopsy report is coming at any time now. We won't know the outcome of, you know, the final verdict as far as the officer's concerned and what action the police will take against Daniel until they do an internal investigation.
Right, and that investigation has been launched. In fact, Mayor de Blasio delayed his vacation one day to make sure that it was developed. Yes. And how quickly can we at least get some preliminary results from the autopsy? We're
hoping any time now. We're supposed to sometime this evening, so if not today, then certainly tomorrow. And of course, the funeral is tomorrow as well.
Yes, indeed. Akhtar Khan, very good report. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Move on now to another story. Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan met for the first time with the parents of the kidnapped schoolgirls and escaped classmates. We have this report.
The parents of some of the abducted girls have finally met the man they expect to bring their children home. Over 100 parents and 51 girls lucky enough to escape Boko Haram met President Goodluck Jonathan for the first time today, nearly 100 days after the kidnapping. The girls were abducted from their boarding school in the northeastern town of Chibok on April 14th, sparking global outcry. Last week, Mr. Jonathan agreed to meet 12 parents and 5 girls who escaped, following a request by Pakistani rights campaigner Malala Yousafzai. But the Chibok community called the meeting off at the last minute, saying it had been organised in a hurry, so there was not enough time to consult with all the parents. Mr. Jonathan accused the global Bring Back Our Girls campaign group for playing politics and derailing the meeting. The US, UK, France, China, and Israel have been helping in operations to secure the release of the girls, who are believed to be held in the Zambeza forest near Nigeria's border with Cameroon. Boko Haram have offered to free the girls in exchange for the release of its fighters and relatives held by the security forces, but the Nigerian government has rejected this. Separated from their children, the abductions have been devastating for the parents. Tragically, 11 have died since April. 7 were reportedly killed earlier this month during a raid by Boko Haram on a village close to Chibok, and another 4 have died of heart failure, high blood pressure, and other illnesses blamed on the trauma caused by the abductions. Today's meeting was intended to provide reassurance for the remaining parents who simply want their children back. But after more than 3 months, the fate of the girls and Nigeria's ability to defend families against Boko Haram remains uncertain. Alex Lugton, Arise News.
Now let's see what's making headlines across Africa today. Authorities in the Democratic Republic of Congo say they repelled an attack on the military barracks in Kinshasa. There was no immediate report of the number of casualties. Officials are continuing their investigation. And Tanzanian authorities discovered 85 bags in a landfill which contain human body parts. They've arrested 8 suspects from a private medical teaching college. The bags also contain surgical instruments and used disposable gloves. Nearby residents said they became suspicious after a truck repeatedly dumped black plastic bags into the landfill. And that is the Arise News Across Africa report.
If I was building my own news network, I think I'd want broad, in-depth knowledge of important issues throughout the world.
I would want to recruit a fairly diverse staff that had different life experiences before they came to news.
We want to see how we can help ourselves and help benefit other people, and not just see what's up with the celebrities and where they're going and traveling and buying this and buying that.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Well, the literary world continues to pay tribute to the Nobel Prize-winning author Nadine Gordimer, who recently passed away. It was on Sunday, as a matter of fact. Arise News book editor Marva Allen shares some of her thoughts. Hey, Marva, it's good to see you.
Wonderful.
Lost a giant in the literary world.
Another giant. Boy, this has been a year, hasn't it? Mm-hmm. So many wonderful literary people have passed on. But, you know, we have to acknowledge them. And Gordimer was a very prolific writer, very involved in the civil rights. in the apartheid, and was a good friend of Nelson Mandela, also won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and she was not formally trained, so we just want to acknowledge that she's there. She has a body of work that people should become familiar with.
Yes, and very often when these great legends pass away, they enjoy a resurgence in interest and popularity.
They certainly do.
Yeah, hopefully that will happen with her.
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about the books that you've brought with this. First, Blood Feud.
Blood Feud, and what a feud.
Which sounds like a novel, but it's not.
It actually reads like a novel. And, obviously this is hearsay, but, Edward Klein has been a political writer for the New York Times. He has written many books, including the books on the Kennedys and so on. So he has his sources. And this is a book that's talking about the feud between the Obamas and the Clintons. And the feud, part of that feud, also with Oprah and the Obamas. And so it opens with Hillary declaring that she's going to have a presidential library as she's lunching with all her friends from Wesleyan. So obviously giving a clue to the fact that she is going to run. And, you know, her big concern is her wayward husband, you know, and how she would rein him in and kick him out if he didn't do right, you know. So it's really very gossipy, but it's so interesting.
I was going to say it sounds quite salacious.
It sounds quite salacious.
But it's important. We have to mention, you know, Ed Klein has been criticized by a number of people by having very thin sources.
Absolutely. You know, I mean, you know, talking about whether the president and Martha's Vineyard and his wife slept in the same bed, you know, from the housekeepers and so on and so forth. And, you know, but the one that was interesting to me was the backdoor deals that happen when people are negotiating these powers. So, you know, for Stomping in 2012, what was promised to Clinton, what was promised to Oprah, and why she didn't stop.
Well, speaking of that, I don't know if I've been living under a rock, but I didn't know there was a feud between them, if in fact there is.
If in fact there is, you know, could be propaganda, but it's in the book, right? So if it's in the book, it has to be true. The story goes that she was building OWN and she would stomp for the president, she would get unprecedented access to the White House. And from that, she could build these exclusive stories, you know, about and help to put her station on the map. And apparently Michelle didn't allow it. You know, so there are all of those things. So if you want a little bit of inside gossip on what goes on in the Power people, here it is.
Yet to be determined whether it's determined whether it's fact or fiction.
Fact or fiction.
Fun reading nonetheless.
Fun reading nonetheless.
Okay, so let's move on. The Signature of All Things.
We know this author, the very, very famous now Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, you know, movie made, soundtracks made. And this is her third or fourth book, I believe, and this is set in the Age of Enlightenment, which means the 18th century or so. And it is something I enjoyed because it was scientific, you know, and it's about a botanist, a young guy, an English guy who was very poor, you know, grew up with a famous botanist and became a botanist and became a very rich man in South America selling quinine, you know. And so his daughter, Alma, is also a brainiac, also a scientist, and she meets this guy who's complete worldview. So it's special creation versus evolution. So she is evolution, and he is special creation. He believes in mystery, he believes in divine, he believes in all of those things, and how they navigate this relationship together. Very interesting, very unusual, you know, but she did a lot of research.
Weighty stuff for a novel.
It's very weighty, but you know, I mean, she did a lot of research, and you know, I mean, everything in the period was right. You know, the conversations were right. You know, the language was right. So you know, I mean, she did a good job. She did a good job. It's not Eat, Love, Pray, or Eat, Pray, Love, but it's a good book, and it's the secret of all thoughts. What is it called?
The signature of all things.
Yeah.
Okay. And then finally, let's turn to The Power of No.
The Power of No. How many times?
My 4-year-old daughter knows that.
And we should learn it, right? A lot of kids know that, and we lose so much of that when we grow up. But how many times have you said no, said yes to something and regretted it? I mean, you're overcommitted, you know, yes to people hurting you, yes to all of these things, and you could easily have said no. It's the hardest sentence to say, but it's a full sentence, right? No, just as it's yes. So what the authors, husband and wife, are arguing is that if you said no to things that you really do not want to do, how much more time would you have for the yeses? So how much more love and abundance and enjoyment could you have if you truly said no? You know, I mean,
that's tough.
It is very tough. I mean, I'm practicing no because, you know, you realize that you're on a treadmill when you keep saying.
Let me test it out on you. Will you stay for another hour?
Absolutely no.
There you go. See, you can do it. Marva Allen, as always, it's a pleasure.
Thank you.
See you next week.
You too.
That's going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for saying yes to Arise America. Say no to turning away. And we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.